Welcome to the DeFi podcast, where we attempt to imagine the future of crypto, because foresight is what makes great investors. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment. All statements made by hosts or guests are strictly beliefs or point of views and are not recommendations to buy, sell, or hold any security. Hosts or guests may hold certain securities discussed in this podcast.
All right, welcome to the show. Today we're talking to Rhett from Wave Capital. We're going to be talking about the Lightning Network.
Welcome, Rhett.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Welcome. Good to have you on again.
So we're an Avalanche-focused show. Why are we discussing the Lightning Network, Jared?
I think it's important to kind of cover our bases. You know, we want to be aware of everything that's going on. Just because we have a particular interest in Avalanche doesn't mean that other things aren't relevant. And the Lightning Network is something that I think has been an interesting thing developing kind of slowly and quietly in the background that really, I don't think a lot of people talk about it.
And Rhett, what's your interest in the Lightning Network?
I've got a lot of interest in scaling in general, and the different approaches to scaling blockchains, which is like, well, they're generally speaking, there's layer 1 scaling versus layer 2 scaling. So, Solana is at the far end of kind of trying to scale through layer 1 alone. Avalanche is taking a different approach to also scale through layer 1. And then in layer 2, there's all these different options, right? You can scale through state channels. That's what Lightning is. There's rollups, which is something that I'm really into. There's also things like Plasma, Volitions, Validiums. There's like these different type of scaling solutions that have different trade-offs. So I've just had a lot of interest in that for a long time. I play in many ecosystems, but I'm most Ethereum centric. And so have spent a lot of time in that just because Ethereum is kind of scaling mostly through rollups. So I've just had a lot of interest in understanding that solution versus kind of the competing solutions and what are the pros and cons basically.
Right. And I think the idea is that if we cannot take this blockchain tech and make it useful to the public at large, well, then it remains sort of, a science project, right? So how do we get it to be adopted by all? I think payments from individual to individual or individual to business is an obvious step that needs to happen. And the Lightning Network is the solution for Bitcoin, which has the most liquidity in all of crypto, obviously. I think it's something that we need to address. And we've been wanting to address it for a while, and we've had a hard time getting information on it. Rhett happens to know a lot about state channels and has some opinions on this. So let's begin discussing it specifically. Where should we start?
I think we should just kind of start with, why should we use the Lightning Network to begin with, right? What major benefit does it offer over L1 Bitcoin? I think it's kind of obvious, but it could be useful just to maybe bring everyone up to speed who isn't totally aware.
Yeah, so I think the benefit of using that is if you are going to be transacting, especially if you're going to be transacting relatively frequently in Bitcoin, transaction fees are very close to zero on the Lightning Network, and they are not in Bitcoin layer 1. So if you need to do something like if you are a person who wants to pay and be paid in Bitcoin, you'll eat up quite a bit of that in transaction fees if you're transacting on layer 1. On Lightning, you could do thousands of transactions and you wouldn't even notice the transaction fees at all.
Can you just quickly describe what is the state channel and how does it work?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk really kind of high level here. But a state channel is basically like, okay, you set up this smart contract that you have some number of participants in. So say we set up a state channel between Bob and Alice. And now Bob and Alice, when sending Bitcoin back and forth to each other, they just kind of keep track. They keep their own running tally of okay, I sent you $1, you sent me $1, yada, yada. At the end of the day, I am 10 down and Alice is 10 up if I'm Bob. And then periodically you will kind of settle your tally to the layer 1 blockchain. So you're pulling basically everything off chain and just kind of keeping between the two of you or between the group of you, like kind of an off-chain ledger. And then you just checkpoint basically to the layer 1 blockchain.
So what would you say are the pros and cons of a system like the Lightning Network versus other chains, kind of like the L1 plus the L2, comparing the different ecosystems?
Yeah, so good question. So there's a few kind of ways to think about that. One is like, why would you want to scale through L2s rather than L1? And generally speaking, if you are scaling through layer one, I personally am not aware of any possible way to do that that does not sacrifice some level of decentralization. If you increase the block sizes, or if you do something like subnets, or both, or if you increase block speed, any of those things basically give up some level of decentralization. So people who are scaling through L1, and this may be a reasonable way to approach it, might say, well, that's a reasonable sacrifice to make. Like the amount of decentralization we're giving up to double the size of our blocks or have blocks twice as often may be a fair trade-off, but it's still a trade-off, right? And the amount that you're trading off if you scale through layer two is often much, much less, because you can keep the layer one with smaller, slower blocks, and then you pull a lot of burden onto the layer two. So that's kind of the main reason for scaling through layer two rather than layer one, is that at layer one, you don't have to sacrifice as much decentralization specifically, and security potentially as well. So that's kind of the reason to use a layer two scaling solution, is if you're saying we want to be maximally decentralized, not just decentralized enough at layer one, then we are much more limited in how we can change the parameters of layer one. So that now we're going to be scaling through layer two. And there are different ways you can scale through layer two. So one of them is state channels. The other most common are rollups. And at a high level, state channels give you way more scaling. You can scale just about infinitely through state channels, and Lightning is a state channel. Rollups give you a lot of scaling, but not nearly as much. Like a rollup will maybe give you 100x, maybe more. Maybe you change some parameters, you might get it up to like 1,000x more scalable than layer one, but you couldn't do a million times as scalable.
And are you saying that state channels have the potential to do a million times as scalable?
State channels are nearly unlimited. Rollups are much more scalable than layer one, but are not. But the main difference is rollups inherit their security from layer one, and state channels don't. So state channels have a much larger security trade-off. Where, like, if you say, okay, my layer one is super secure and it's super decentralized, and I want to fully inherit that, then you need to use a roll-up approach. Whereas a state channel has different trust assumptions and worse trust assumptions. So there's a trade-off there. You say, okay, a state channel is going to give me way more scale, but it's not going to give me nearly as much security because it doesn't inherit in the same way. And then the other, I guess you could say, limitation of a state channel is it cannot handle as complex of state. And so a state channel can handle something like payments really easily. Think of a Visa sort of thing where I'm paying you, you're paying me, I'm paying Walmart. But it couldn't handle DeFi. So you couldn't do Uniswap trades via a state channel.
So if you're comparing the two, it looks like if your only focus is sending and receiving, the Lightning Network is a really good option for that. But if you want to get more into different things like DeFi or doing NFTs and stuff like that, then it's technically just not possible, right?
Yeah, there's no, that I'm aware of, there isn't a good way to do most of the more complex things via state channel. DeFi is the most obvious. So DEX trades, like Uniswap trades, I'm not aware of any way to do that via state channel. So there's those two trade-offs. It doesn't have the same security and trust assumptions as rollups, and then it also can't handle as complex of state, but you get this, crazy high level of scale.
Do you even really need DeFi at that point?
So I guess that's a question of, like, in the financial system, if you've got a really good Visa where you can pay Walmart, do you need banks? Do you need the stock exchange? Do you need like lending and borrowing? And I think the answer is yes. So payments are just one very small part of the financial system, and it's an important part. But lending and borrowing, exchanging assets, those sorts of things are really important parts of the financial system as well.
Like, we haven't solved that anywhere else. right? Like there's no, people are not using the blockchain tech to transact, truly.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that would be a really positive thing for the crypto ecosystem to get more of that. Like if someone built a Visa-like payment system and then got integrations built out where I actually could use my crypto wallet to buy stuff at Walmart. Ideally, you could maybe even choose what you pay in and they choose what they receive in, and they don't have to be the same thing. There's some magic you can do there. That would be awesome, but it's not something that's widespread at this point.
So who's most likely to get there first?
That's a good question. I'm not sure, but Lightning versus another. I think in order to get there first, you need to be able to support many different asset types. I think most people are most interested in paying with stable coins, not Bitcoin, and not Ethereum, not AVAX tokens. I guess the problem with Lightning is if it's only supporting Bitcoin, it's much less likely to get a lot of traction than if you have a state channel, say a state channel that sits on top of ETH and says, hey, we're going to support tons of different assets and we're going to make it easy to plug into other DeFi things. Then there's some advantages there, I think.
Do you think there's anything that the Lightning Network can achieve other than the really high scaling that could not be achieved on another chain that, for example, has a Bitcoin token?
Well, so there's one thing actually. So Bitcoin layer one is more secure and decentralized than most layer ones. And so you could say Lightning Network gives you all the scale you need, and then you're periodically settling to a more secure, more decentralized blockchain than, say, Solana. The only real advantage. But in every other way, there's no advantage.
So my last question would be, what are the potential vulnerabilities that could come up with the Lightning Network?
So I think there's two main problems. One of them is it doesn't inherit trust very well from the layer one, and so if you are in a state channel with people that you really trust and can trust, then that's okay. But if you are looking at really adversarial environments, you may end up with problems. Which those adversarial environments are the things that blockchains are kind of meant to be solving for. So that's piece number one. But the more important thing is, in my opinion, is that the Lightning Network ends up being vampiric to Bitcoin. This is like a whole nother line of conversation. But my opinion is that Bitcoin has a looming security problem where the halvening cycle, as block rewards cut in half every 4 years, you have this exponentially reducing amount of revenue coming to the miners from block rewards, and then it needs to be offset by an equally growing amount of transaction fees. Well, if most Bitcoin transacting is pulled off of layer one and onto the Lightning Network, then less and less of the Bitcoin transacting accrues any fee revenue to Bitcoin miners, and then the layer one becomes insecure. There's a bunch of other problems with their security model, but one of them is that their chosen scaling method accrues little to no fee revenue for miners. And so if fee revenue for miners goes down as Lightning Network usage increases, which is what I expect to see, and you have block rewards reducing, then Bitcoin gets into this really scary layer one security problem where their security budget is just too small. And then mining reduces, and then you're easier to 51% attack, basically.
Right. So basically, by necessity, it has to continue increasing in value in order to make it profitable for the miners to continue securing the network.
Yeah, it would have to basically, because the block rewards are reducing at an exponential rate and fee revenue is not growing very fast, the price of Bitcoin would have to increase at an exponential rate, which just cannot happen forever.
So
Right.
getting back onto the Lightning Network specifically, we've been looking for information on this topic, and we were looking to actually interview someone from the Bitcoin community specifically on this, and couldn't find anyone who would come on the show, and couldn't find that much information on it. My question is, why do you think this is so?
That's a good question. I couldn't tell you specifically. I know the Bitcoin community tends to be pretty hostile to anyone outside of Bitcoin. Um, I've seen it described, I think I mentioned to you before, I've seen it described before as like Bitcoin is a fundamentalist secular religion. And I think that's kind of right, where they have kind of these purity tests and they are very, very hostile to outsiders. And then they have this in-group, out-group dynamic. And you'll even see them kind of throw people out of their religion periodically for what you might think is like very minor things. Like Nick Carter tweeted that his company invested in a company building a wallet and basically got ousted by the community. And so my guess, I haven't interacted with the people that you're talking to, but my guess is they say, oh, this is a podcast with DeFi in the name. These people are into the Avalanche ecosystem. They are part of the out group and we don't want to like even engage with them. The one way that I see Bitcoiners engage with non-Bitcoiners is through insults mostly. But I don't see a lot of positive interactions between them and other groups. They are the only crypto community that I really see that way right now. I hope the others don't follow suit, but it's a very strange kind of cultural community. I think it is legitimately, I consider it more of a secular religion than even like an investment or a technology community. It's serving a very different function for those people. So that's kind of my perspective of the Bitcoin community. And my expectation is that someone who's building in Lightning is probably deep within kind of the Bitcoin maximalist kind of culture and is like not going to be that willing to engage with people who are in any other crypto community, basically.
So similar question in terms of looking for stats on the growth and where the progress of this network. We haven't really found much, and maybe we're looking in the wrong place. But do you have any stats on this, or is it just because the general impression that you get is that this was something that was popular in a few years ago and started getting traction, and then sort of never went anywhere. But Bitcoin has all the liquidity, and it seems like a nice idea. So we have to take it seriously. But it doesn't look like it's moving forward. Do you have any comments on that?
So because a state channel is kind of a private channel, there is no good public data. And I don't think that anyone really knows how much volume is moving through these. You just have to kind of guess at it. Or you'd have to be a person who's hosting a lot of these channels so that you can see. So I think that's partly why you're having a hard time finding some of that. I've looked for some of that information as well. And I've even seen people with some of the bigger Lightning Network like services get asked for like volume numbers, and I haven't seen them come out. But I think that's part of the problem is that it's not auditable in the same way. You can just look up and see how much volume is moving through Uniswap. But my guess is also that it probably is not getting that used. And it's for a specific reason. It's because Bitcoin is the people who are really into Bitcoin want to buy and hold Bitcoin forever. They don't want to get a little bit of Bitcoin and then buy a cup of coffee with it, right? Bitcoin is viewed by its own community as a HODL coin, not a transaction coin. And so for that reason, my guess is that the idea that there's like a ton of throughput and transactions going through Lightning right now and people just, don't know because they're private channels seems unlikely, because very few people who hold Bitcoin would want to be doing that, right? So my guess is it's not getting that used. My guess is that that's the reason, but it's hard to know for sure. I think the likelihood of having really high transaction throughput would be higher if it was primarily stable coins rather than Bitcoin and was deeply integrated in like merchants where like I could just show up at Walmart or I could show up at any place and pay with stable coins. Then I think you could see potentially really high use. I think a service like Visa, if they want to, build like kind of crypto services, which I know Visa is building some things there, it makes sense for them to build a state channel or a competitor of theirs to build a state channel that primarily uses stable coins, and then they go partner with these people. So I think those two things, you don't see a lot of partnerships with like merchants, and then you also are facilitating high throughput transacting in a token that is meant to be really low turnover. It's like you buy your Bitcoin and you're going to sit on it basically your whole life. So why do I need Lightning Network?
That's a very nice statement to end it on, I think. I love it. That's very good.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for watching. If you're still around, hit the like button. Maybe leave us a comment. JF likes it very much. Thanks for watching.
Ciao, everyone. Thank you, Rhett.
Next week.
Thanks.
Bye.
Good talk.